that's breaking news. The first group of Israeli hostages have been released by Gaza and are currently being taken to Egypt by the Red Cross. That follows 12 Thai hostages who've also been released from captivity in Gaza.
Commentator Benedict Spence is still with us in the studio, but first let's speak to, I hope he's there this time, Philip Ingram, a former senior military intelligence officer. Yes, you are there, Philip. Good to see you. Your thoughts on what is going on right now? Good news so far. 12 Thai hostages released, 13 Israeli hostages. Now, what we were talking about in the break there is this ceasefire, truce, humanitarian pause, 4 days, maybe 9. To what extent during this pause in hostilities, Philip, will Hamas be able to regroup, rebuild their weaponry and come back as a refreshed fighting force?
Well, it'll certainly give them a chance to shore up their defences. They see where Israel is coming from now, so Israel has lost the element of surprise and they've lost the momentum that they had in starting to push Hamas out. So they'll be able to get their forces together, put additional booby traps around the place. They'll be trying to do that as covert as possible. Israel will be watching for it, and that you'll get their own casualties and everything else sorted out. But it's a fantastic first move, the first 13 Israelis, and I was surprised at the story of the 12 Thais being released, which is separate to the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, on that, that's what I wanted to ask you. What is the significance of that? Because one assumes for many Israeli families now, with loved ones being held hostage, that it isn't necessarily the news they were hoping for. I mean, is this sort of set up to, in one hand, increase domestic pressure on Netanyahu about securing the release of the hostages from Israel at all costs, and at the same time, sort of, increase international pressure on Israel to not return to heavy bombardment?
You've hit the nail on the head with both issues. The international pressure. Clearly, the Thai government has been negotiating with Qatar, with the Egyptians, and they've been negotiating in with Hamas, and that's something that we hadn't heard of. The significance of hostages in the Israeli psyche can't be underestimated or understated in any way, and that will put huge pressure on Netanyahu, because from a military perspective, the military won't want to have stopped, because as soon as you stop your momentum, it's very, very difficult to get it started again, and it tends to end up in a lot more casualties, and that will end up potentially on more civilian casualties. I'm not seeing any indications of a longer-term solution on the table, so that's telling me that once all of the hostages have been released in this phase, fighting will start again until there's either more hostage releases coming in or something more concrete is put on the table from a longer-term perspective.
And I assume, Philip, Netanyahu's mission, often stated, is to completely destroy Hamas. So at the end of these releases, these exchanges, don't forget there's 150 Palestinians coming the other way, convicted criminals apparently. At the end of all of this, it's kind of incumbent upon Netanyahu, is it not, to resume his mission? He's sort of cornered himself into a position where he can't just say, OK, well, we've had 9 days of a humanitarian pause, or 4 or 5 days, so perhaps we can make that permanent. It's incumbent upon him, due to the rhetoric he's been coming out with over the past few weeks, that he's going to have to resume hostilities, isn't he?
It is, but, define destroy Hamas. If he renders them or gets them into a position where they're militarily incapable, i.e. they voluntarily leave Gaza and go to another country where they can't directly influence Israel, and Gaza can start to be taken over by a Palestinian organisation and potentially the Palestinian Authority, to have a proper government that's in there, then Netanyahu could turn around and say, I have destroyed them from their ability to continue to attack us. So there's a lot to play with here, and hopefully this will start into something that's longer term. But it'll only go longer term if there is something else on the table that can be negotiated with. Hamas is starting from a very difficult point. It's still their stated aim to destroy the state of Israel and to kill every Jew.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. Well, if you are just tuning in, these are the pictures of the Israeli and Thai hostages that were released from Gaza in the last hour. The Israeli hostages have now been transferred to Egypt by the Red Cross. Benedict, final word to you. I mean, part of this truce, as we know, was the demand from Hamas that there is a surveillance blackout over Gaza as they, we suspect, try to regroup, potentially rearm. I mean, this means, of course, that we have the international community and the Israelis more specifically won't have any idea necessarily how they are being resourced and who by.
Yes, I think the Israelis would probably be fairly confident that they would already be able to guess. I think that they've been surveying Hamas for some time, and that's partly why the attack was such a surprise, because actually I think it's fairly well understood that Israel has managed to penetrate aspects of Hamas quite deeply, as they have Iran and many of the other organizations that are arrayed against them. It's going to be interesting to see actually what it is that Hamas can get. I suspect most of their armaments are already in place. They've been preparing for this for a very long time. The key thing, I think, is fuel. And that's because, we've been talking about this. We heard it a lot. I mean, the Israelis, they've cut off the fuel into Gaza. Who is going to power the hospital generators? There's already an awful lot of fuel in Gaza, or there was. Why? Because Hamas has been stockpiling it and wasn't interested in releasing it to the hospitals. Why? Because they need it to power the generators to keep the supply of oxygen in their own tunnels going. So that's very interesting that they've said that specifically, fuel. Does that implicate that perhaps they're running low on that sort of thing?
But what, as I was just saying, I think it's incumbent upon Netanyahu to resume hostilities.
Yes.
I don't see how he can get out of that because there still will be 190 hostages trapped in those tunnels. What do you think Hamas want? Would they, because all of this talk about the ceasefire of the lot, there must be a ceasefire, come on everybody calling for a ceasefire, neglected to note that both sides did not want one. It wasn't just Israel that didn't want one, nor did Hamas. What will Hamas want going forward?
I think Hamas will be looking, with their regrouping, will be with the idea of bogging down the IDF when hostilities restart, in the hope that they can maybe drag other actors into the conflict if the situation, the humanitarian situation in Gaza, gets bad enough. But we need to remember, for all people are saying, we heard it just then, again, people saying, oh, well, what happens, how many Hamas deaths, how many more people will be radicalized by what happens? We didn't say that in 1945, oh, what if we bomb Germany? How many more Nazis will that create? No. The attitude that the Israelis will take on the lessons of 1945 is, if you have an existential crisis, and this is existential for them, you have a genocidal ideology that wants to wipe you out, you don't sit there and go, oh, what if we radicalize more people? Your attitude is, dead people can't be radicalized. And that is very harsh, but that is their attitude towards Hamas.